if as a new customer, as a loyal customer, as someone in the middle, if you experience the best possible customer experience that you can get from that first ad or that first word of mouth or someone telling you about the product, right through to when that's delivered and you've cooked it and you have enjoyed that meal and you have put a meal on the table that everyone enjoys, then that is the golden rule of retention.
If you ever want to feel like you're on a rocket, but you don't have $100 million to pay Elon Musk, you could always join our next guest's company. It grew a staggering 84% last year. It's already the biggest competitor in her category in the US and is currently the top company globally in a category that's forecast to grow 22% annually until 2028. By comparison, rocket ships might seem slow. My name is John Koetsier. Welcome to CleverTap Engage.
And my name is Peggy on Salz, and today we're chatting with Emma Baines, Global Director of Creative Services at, well, I guess you could guess that we talked about it enough, John, HelloFresh, right? They delivered 600 million meals last year in 15 countries, still growing very fast. Emma leads HelloFresh's in-house creative agency, working across TV, digital performance marketing, all channels actually, 5 brands across 15 countries and counting. And she's had 15 years experience working for award-winning branding and design agencies in London, which is why we're talking about brand, so important, that part of the journey, that part of the company. And she was also part of the team at the Future Laboratory that set up an online subscription-based consumers trends intelligence service. So we have the data and we have the drive. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, what an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on this show.
We are so pumped to have you, and we are looking forward to this conversation. Emma, let's start here. 2020 was insane for most of us. Frankly, 2021 is not that much different. How about you and HelloFresh?
I mean, I'm speechless, actually. It's been a ride, let's put it that way. I think we all were taken aback by the events of last year. It was like a rocket, and I feel where in a very uncertain world, we suddenly became at the forefront of it, providing solutions and meal solutions and food became very, very important. And suddenly we were thrust into the limelight a little bit as well, more so than usual. And it was just really, I would say it was a roller coaster, and it was this wave, this everlasting wave. And we're still on it, actually. You know, we're a company, we're 10 years this year. We celebrate our 10-year anniversary in November. You know, we've gone from startup into, you know, a company in growth and essentially a unicorn. And now even this, you know, the pandemic happened and we've got even more growth going on. It's just, it's insane, but it's an amazing learning curve. There's a lot of learnings and a lot of challenges, but absolutely a time to not lean back, let's say, and absolutely kind of go with it, ride that wave.
Not lean back. Well, I have to say, Emma, your timing is impeccable because you led a rebrand of HelloFresh right in the middle of that wave. You're surfing that wave and boom, let's do a rebrand. How did you approach that? You're surfing this wave, you're going nuts, you're expanding the company massively. How did you approach that? What was your objective?
We started that project and then suddenly it hits and I'm thinking, wow, this is going to gain some traction because whenever we launch, this like life's changed. And actually this is the perfect time for us. So it really, the project as it speaks, or the initiative really kind of snowballed into something very beneficial for the company. Actually, it was really like almost like the perfect timing. And also, though, we had to be very careful about that because I think, you know, from a perception point of view, from consumers' point of view, we didn't want to be seen as suddenly, oh, we're benefiting so much from this pandemic. Look at us, we can now rebrand. And that was absolutely not what we wanted to do. And so we were just very careful and very about how we went about that and how we communicated that. Mm-hmm. It was very important to us. But the actual rebrand itself, I joined HelloFresh nearly 3 years ago, and it was on the table at that point. It was kind of the starting point of this conversation of, we have this brand, we've been going kind of 7 years at the time. So we had three main pillars and objectives for the rebrand itself. The first one was scalability, and essentially the evolution in the tech world. Digital had really come on, and our previous brand didn't allow for that. There was no scalability at all. Even, for example, if you look at our logo, our previous logo, we had the words HelloFresh written within a line. And scale that right down onto a social media post or onto our website or somewhere like that, you can't even read the brand. So therefore, we had this real challenge. Even as well, for example, we had two logos. We had our main Lime logo that everyone's kind of very aware of, which was also a challenge with the wording in, but we also had a secondary logo, this horizontal, which was actually in the end almost bumped up to be the primary logo because it was more usable, and that was the one that was on the website. So we were a brand that didn't even have its primary logo on its website. Therefore, there was an intrinsic issue with our system. We also had to take into consideration, obviously, there's a huge operational growth. So we're a company in growth, we're always growing. And what does that mean for our products? And what does that mean specifically for operations? And that, what I mean about operations is like packaging. And for example, in our operations in our warehouses, we have pick and packers that perhaps can't read. Therefore, if you're looking at two different types of rice or rice and a pasta, how do you distinguish? Even the packaging is going to look really, really similar. So how do you distinguish that for those people to make sure that the customer gets the right product? Well, you do it through color, you do it through shape, and you do it through iconography. And so all of these things, we are realizing we didn't really have a system that was scalable. It wasn't flexible. And then last but absolutely not least is also the evolution in style and customer preferences. And I think, look, there was some things from our previous brand that we took into the new brand, namely the color and the name. But it was really important looking at kind of the other big players out there and looking at, okay, what's everyone doing? What are these tech companies doing? What are the big players like Facebook and Instagram and Google, and how are they rebranding? What are they doing? And their small tweaks, N26 made one of the smallest tweaks to their brand. But it was all because of kind of making sure that it works from a scalability point of view. And you could argue that it looks very simple and very clean, but actually that's also what the consumer is looking for. We're looking for clear and very kind of easy to understand logos.
What's really interesting here, Emma, is that Peggy and I are typically talking to people who have mobile businesses. And sure, brand is really critical for them, absolutely, but it is entirely a digital thing. It doesn't impact the physical world. Not like HelloFresh, where you have a whole distribution network and drivers and production and a physical presence in people's homes. That's really interesting. It's a different order of challenge.
Absolutely. And that makes us really complex.
Yes.
And that's where that consumer journey and that customer experience becomes really important. And that's why the brand, it becomes very, very important to ensure that all of those touch points are consistent. So when you first see your digital ad and you see your ad on social, you're like, okay, I'm going to click onto that. Okay, what's the landing page look like? What's this user experience? Do I understand the product? Do I want to buy this? Oh, now it's in my home because I bought it. Does this experience match what I was expecting from the ad? And that's really interesting and so important. So that from a branding perspective, when we also did the rebrand, we did a lot of thinking about that as well, from UX to packaging to will operations be able to work within this framework that we've built? So yeah, there was a lot of challenges there that we had to overcome, and we're still, there's still things that get thrown up. So it's ever changing.
What I'm excited about hearing this, John, is, you think about it initially, oh, it's the logo. And we've asked guests on our show, what is it? Is the CMO, is that in charge of the logo? This is in charge of the complete experience. It's even the connective tissue, the consistency of the entire brand experience from the moment the customer interacts with it to also all the operations in the background, and that the logo, that the creative is key to scale. Now that's something different, because now you have to really, well, if you didn't do it before, now you really respect the creative. It's not just about engaging the user, it's about running the company. I do want to talk about the customers though for a moment, because your customer base grew by millions. I mean, 84% growth. That's incredible. And you had to adapt your creative. We've been talking about that to enable your company to scale. But you also want to cater to this audience. And what you have is you have the loyal audience that may say, oh, I remember HelloFresh from back in the day before even Emma joined the company. And now I've got pandemic. You've got this influx of people who maybe, and I know a few of them myself, people who'd never prepared a meal before. They just lived in the cafeteria. Welcome to the real world. And I have a number of neighbors and colleagues who did exactly this because of that. It was like, got to learn how to cook. And I'm single, so I'm really in a mess. And you had to get them as well. So how do you situate the creative and the elements that you need to get right?
Yeah, that's a really poignant and kind of timely topic at the moment. Essentially what we do and what I see my job is to do is to educate the consumer on what we are. And we've talked about that previously. We touched upon it in terms of the product being so complex that actually we don't have the benefits of being Coca-Cola and we're selling a product, we're selling a process. And so that's how, when we approach all of our creative, and the ones that outperform the most is when we explain the product and explain the process and explain what you get as a result of that. And then there are different types of consumers, and we see this in our focus groups that we always do, wherever it will be in the world. There's always the person that's never ever going to buy HelloFresh because they know how to cook. They don't need us. There is nothing that they could possibly need from us at all, and they're very, very vocal about that. And then we have our very, very loyal customers. There's this huge kind of area in the middle, and that's our kind of playing ground. And that's who we would like to target and speak to. And how do we do that? By educating them on our process. And how do we do that is through our creative. I call it this really fun game that I do, but everyone kind of, and even now, interestingly, and I say to people, everyone's like, oh, where do you work? I say, HelloFresh. Have you heard of it? Oh, I know HelloFresh. I know exactly. Yeah, I love it, love it, love it. And I play this kind of fun but mean game where it's like, what is it? And then they kind of like, they get really stumped because it's like, oh, it's food in a bag, and I think it's delivered. And I feel so mean, but for me, it's learning, because I'm like, okay, yeah, you know the name and the brand, so yay us, but we still need to tell you what it is to maybe convert you. And there's a lot of barriers there. And one of them is not understanding the process. Therefore, I then explain to them the process kindly, and we get over this kind of awkward moment. But it is very much about explaining it. And once people understand it, and that's our biggest barrier, because once they get it in their homes as well, and we see this from focus groups and all the research that we do, once people see the benefits that we bring, convenience, peace of mind, variety, or, fun of discovery, there's plenty of them. But once people understand that, but you have to live that to see it. You don't believe it until you've got the product. And that's what we need to make, is that connection between, okay, I'm telling you how it works, versus, I've got the product and I understand it. And that movable middle is where we're trying to target, basically.
It's so fascinating to hear you talk about this right now, because I am one of those people that you are trying to move. Because I'm on Reddit fairly frequently, and there's this ad campaign that I keep seeing. I can't get away from it. And it is from HelloFresh, and it's like up to 16 free meals if I sign up. Coupon code Reddit 16, just for anybody who's listening right now.
Thank you.
I'm sending that to my wife, and we're thinking, should we do that? It's a meal kit. It's kind of cool. That's interesting. We both work from home. Maybe that's a good idea. But interesting to me is, as the Peggy, the process that you go through for creative in order to get to customers. Question is, how often do marketers need a creative refresh? Because we talked to N26, Patrick Stahl, and he was like, I love my logo. It's amazing. And now we just hear that he did a little tweak. Interesting. Very good. How often do marketers need to do a refresh?
So I think you really have to consider what you're doing in terms of, if you're going to look at a rebrand and a creative refresh of that magnitude, there's got to be some substance underneath and an objective clear objectives. And also these things cost money. So you need to make sure that return on investment is going to be significant. And for us, it absolutely was going to be, even if it made sure that we were quicker and we were faster and more efficient. I think when it comes to creative refreshes and other kind of platforms, for example, and we've talked about this before, Peggy, in terms of what is a creative refresh and refreshing creatives on a more regular basis. And I hear this it's like this word, it gives me the creeps. This creative fatigue. How do you measure that? And what is creative fatigue? Is it that person has seen something and been targeted too many times on a particular platform, like even yourself, John mentioned, on Reddit? Is that creative fatigue? And then you're like less likely to purchase, therefore you've disengaged. Or is it that actually that ad just isn't working? And that's very, very hard to decipher because it can be very, very personal. So for you, John, you might think, oh, I've seen this too many times now, I've really had enough. But for someone else, it might just mean, or someone else might have converted, and therefore they're in the funnel. So therefore they're also like not going to interact with it because they're in. Great. So it's really, really hard to measure that. And I think, it depends on the platform. I think it depends on what you're looking to achieve as a business. We have specific cadences that we do things in that we're always playing with and seeing, does that make sense? And I think always just testing, iterating, learning platform-wise, but also it's also down to the message. And I think that's really important because you can create a beautiful creative, but if that message isn't on point and isn't clear, then that consumer isn't going to pick up on that. And we use discounts as like one form of message, but I think there's a lot to be said about targeting the consumer in terms of what do they want to hear, what do they need to hear in order to purchase this.
It's a feeling, or it's an emotional connection. How do you build that, and how do you build that in a very rapidly changing market like yours?
I think it's really important that we understand the consumer, or at least show, how does this product benefit you? How can this fit into your life? That's how we're going to be able to tap into that more emotional feeling. And this is something that we've been doing over the last 3 years with our TV ads, and something that I'm hugely proud of this year. And we've really kind of notched up the emotional kind of side in some of our ads, and that kind of design side as well. We've got this really kind of fresh look to our ads. They should be live now. Again, still following our formula of explaining the process, but really trying to get under the skin of what is the challenges, what are those barriers. And so when you see our ad this year, it's got all of that messaging. It's got everything we need in there to overcome our specific barriers and hopefully talk to the consumer and say, this is how we can help you. And our in-house premise on it was mealtimes made easy. And this is what we always came back to, was this kind of creative platform of how can we make mealtimes easier for you? And how can that benefit you and your family?
I have to say, something that's standing out here for me, John, is education, customer education as an element of engagement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've been reading a lot about that. There are some people, but this is more in the tech. This is more like a SaaS thing. They're saying, oh, we need to educate the customer more because then we can engage them more. And it's like that B2B thing. This is the first time I'm really hearing about that in a B2C scenario and how important that education is. Now, education is also personal, and we're talking about personalizing creatives. Meals are personal. Education has to be on my terms. What's my benefit? Again, you have to have your creatives that will do this. How do you do that? How do you reflect that context? Humanize your advertising. Give me that educational moment. That's entirely what I appreciate because it's on my terms.
Yeah, and you said it, Peggy, meals and food is so personal. It's very much about how we speak to our consumers. And one thing that we've learned from, again, a lot of consumer research and insights, and a couple of years ago, one particular focus group stuck out where we were showing them some creative, a group of 10 people. We were showing them our latest creative ideas for our TVC. And there was one in there particular that followed this very kind of this woman who was talking to the camera and she was explaining things. And the research came back, and every woman and every man in the room said, oh, they're speaking down to me. There's an arrogance there. And we were just like, okay, that's really interesting. We have to take a very humble approach here. Nobody wants to be talked down to, and that's what we see. And that's very, very important here when we're speaking to our consumer. And when I say personalizing and just in every way that we talk to them, we just need to make sure that we aren't doing that. We don't use words like we do this and you do this. That's very important to us. And then in terms of the actual creative itself, we run a number of tests. We've looked at, are there specific meals in specific markets that work better? And there are some, but largely, it's really interesting. Largely people approach food in the same way. So interestingly, we are seeing that the burger, which was one of our highest performing pieces of creative or meals, let's say, we used it in our TVC 2 years ago as a hero dish, is now not performing to the point where we don't even really show a burger anymore, whether that be vegetarian or whether it be meat-based, because it's not performing. And interestingly, I believe that is actually as a result, like thinking about it, this is my own personal opinion, but I think that's also a result of the pandemic, and that people are getting burgers and it's seen as more of a takeaway meal. Therefore, why would I want to purchase that? I can just go and get that from the takeaway. I want this sense of pride, and I want this sense of achievement with my HelloFresh meal. And I think that's particularly interesting as well in terms of like personalizing it, so we don't do burgers anymore in terms of too many ads. So we've taken that out of the fold, but then it's like, okay, how do we personalize this a bit more? What foods are going to work a little bit more for this particular target audience? Largely speaking, it's, as I mentioned, it's very similar across the board, but there are some nuances that we have to take care of as well.
Of course, to personalize, you also need to segment. I'd love to understand more about your segmentation strategy. It's probably a show in itself, but let's focus on the two things that matter, right? At one level, it's very much about focusing on your loyal customers, because they're your high value customers, or they're close to being loyal. They're just on the level of that. And then you mentioned it yourself, and I'd love to hear you unpack this, the movable middle. And what I would like to hear more about is how you optimize the creative based on your segmentation strategy to target high value users, as well as maybe move and nudge a few from the movable middle up to that end of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's a very important topic, and one that I'm constantly asking myself and looking for ways to do so. Essentially, we are looking for conversions. We're looking to move that movable middle, as you said, into those loyal customers. How do we do that? By constantly changing our creatives and trying to understand what is it that's going to get them over the line. Let's say we're looking at this across the world. For example, in Australia right now, we're seeing kind of an increase in conversions, but that's not due to the creative. That's due to the fact that they're in lockdown, and we're benefiting from that, which is amazing. But also then it becomes, okay, how do we retain those? How do we make them loyal consumers? That is largely, yes, down to the creative and the customer journey and the consumer experience, but also the product. It is this holistic experience as well that's really important to ensure that we can deliver that for them.
Emma, what are the metrics that you look at most closely to determine if your creatives are working?
Conversion rate, mostly. We look at click-through rate, but conversion rate mostly, which is challenging for me because click-through rates, obviously, that for me is our job, is to get people into the funnel. And conversion rate, obviously, we want to make sure that they convert, but there's a whole other lot of things that can happen down that line once they're in that funnel that could go wrong. And as consumers, we're really fickle. If something doesn't go into the bag as soon as you've clicked on it, well, you might get bored and you might leave the site. Obviously, CACs are also really important. We take a look at that and ensure that that's how we measure really in terms of, is this performance really doing very well against kind of our best performing kind of business as usual creative. So we take a look at that, and that can be different depending on the market. We do have a refer a friend program, which obviously if you refer a friend, you get some money off your next box and they get money off their first box. On a regular basis as well, that can sometimes be topped up, so you can give people free boxes. And as we all know, word of mouth is incredibly important, and we can measure that as well on who signed up and who stayed as a consumer as a result of that, which is really interesting. I think as well, what also do we look at? We also have a really kind of good feedback metric where we look at this on a regular basis. So we look at our net promoter score for all of our meals. So we can take a look at anywhere at any time how all of the food is performing. And for example, when you go into the site and you pause your delivery for 1 week, there is always there's like, why did I pause? And we look at that very, very closely to look at the reasons why people are kind of stopping their subscription, because that helps us and informs us with, oh, okay, well, if it's actually to do with product, is it to do with the service, the delivery, which it can, unfortunately. It can be anything, but I think that gives us an insight into why people stop. Therefore, we're also like, no, please don't. If we make this better, we can come back and unpause. CRM is a very big part of that. So that's obviously also to do with our Refer a Friend program, but CRM and our communications with that and kind of understanding that is how we, let's say, get over that. But I think metrics wise, those are our biggest kind of things that we really look at in terms of how do we overcome it.
When do you pull the plug? That's a very important part of the campaign. It's almost as much as understanding who your high value users are as to understanding when the creative isn't working, nothing's working, something tells you it's time to stop, that they have just moved from the movable middle down to the end of the road.
Where I'm trying to get to is also preempting that a little bit as well and trying to ensure that doesn't happen. And that's why we have all of this kind of data, why we have a consumer insights, taking into consideration all of the information that we have about our consumer. So for example, the burger, okay, well, if that asset over here isn't working and it's a burger, let's just pull that. Let's just not have it anywhere. And then I see it crop up in a suggestion for one of the hero dishes in our TVC. I'm like, no, not having it. Because if there is any way that might hamper the performance of our TV ad, which it may do, then let's not go there. Let's just not even consider it. And I think we've got to be brave and pull the plug on things, even though it may have taken some time to put something together. But if it isn't performing, then let's pull the plug. But ideally, we would have set ourselves up for success beforehand so that we know, okay, this is likely to perform, or have a backup option as well. That's really, really important. If we're putting something out there that's a little bit different, and we are this year, for example, in our TV campaign, we've done a series of shorts that have a very kind of health focused message. Now, this is very different for us to have such a specific message as part of the television campaign. And we'll try and test that in a few markets. And if it doesn't work, then we'll pull it. And I think we know, however, coupled with the fact that we've created a process spot that we know will engage and educate the consumer. So we have our safety net, so to speak, but we've also tried something a little bit different. And I think the two together is really, really important. So you can therefore be in the position where you can go, okay, that didn't work, scrap it. This we know is going to work, let's keep it. And then of course it's an amazing surprise, and not surprise, but it's an amazing outcome if it does perform as well.
Well, maybe we'll ask you our last question, which we ask every single guest, and that is on the golden rule of retention. I'm not sure there is a golden rule, Peggy. Maybe we just invented that. I'm not 100% certain, but hey, we're saying that there's a golden rule of retention. Unfortunately, of course, it's different for everybody. Everybody has their own golden rule of retention. What is yours?
I personally believe it's about having a very consistent consumer journey and customer experience. Because if, as a new customer, as a loyal customer, as someone in the middle, if you experience the best possible customer experience that you can get from that first ad or that first word of mouth or someone telling you about the product, right through to when that's delivered and you've cooked it and you have enjoyed that meal and you have put a meal on the table that everyone enjoys, then that is the golden rule of retention. And that's taking into consideration, I know, a lot of different areas of the business and different parts, and so many different levers are pulled to get to that moment. But if you get it right, that person's a loyal customer, and that is absolutely worth it. And that's why we do what we do every day, to ensure that consistency of the brand as well.
Love it, love it, love it. Thank you so much, Emma, for joining us on CleverTap Engage.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Wonderful. And for all our audience, hey, if you're watching the video, check out the audio podcast, which is great to consume on the go if you're on the go in these days. And if you're on the audio version, search for us on YouTube to chill and relax and watch us whenever you want.
And you can also get involved because, hey, this podcast is about finding the world's best marketers, getting their top tips. We focus, as you see, on major brands, big stories to tell, even growth stories. If you fit the bill, then DM John or me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Email me at peggy@mobilegroove.com. Let's get you set up soon with your own show. Until then, this is Peggy and Salz.
And this is John Koetsier for CleverTap Engage.